Our next panel is entitled Enhancing Broader Cooperation in the Maritime Domain, Deepening and Updating the Free and Open Indo-Pacific. For our next panel, we are broadening the discussion beyond traditional maritime security cooperation pathways to reflect the wider strategic and economic dimensions of the maritime domain. So we will be exploring how key maritime issues such as the protection of critical supply chains, energy flows, and undersea and digital infrastructure, alongside defense industry cooperation, can be integrated into maritime security partnerships to ensure a free and open Indo-Pacific. So to begin our discussion this morning, we have our first speaker is Major General Fabian Pedregosa, Commander of the Strategic Command of the Armed Forces of the Philippines. General Pedregosa would have wanted to join us in person this morning, but he was unfortunately asked to brief the Secretary of Defense this morning. We were just informed on the ongoing situation in the Middle East, and we know how important that is right now. So but he did send us video message for us to listen to this morning. And later on during the panel, AFP Deputy Commander of Strategic Command, Major General Thad Rufino Candelario, will be graciously joining us to answer your questions. So let us all listen in to the video message of General Pedregosa.
Distinguished guests, partners, colleagues, and friends, magandang umaga po sa inyong lahat. I am Major General Fabian M. Pedregosa, the Commander sa Strategic Command, Armed Forces of the Philippines. First, please accept my apologies for not being able to join you today. I have an equally important activity that I need to attend to in GHQ. However, the brilliant Deputy Commander of Strategic Command, Major General Tad Rufino Candelario, is with you to answer all your hard questions. Thank you, General Tad. Also would like to thank Professor Dindo Manhit for this privilege of sharing my thoughts with you on the topic Strategic Areas of Cooperation to Advance a Free and Open Indo-Pacific in the perspective of the Strategic Command, Armed Forces of the Philippines. Let me begin in a simple way. For us Filipinos in the Philippines, the sea is personal. It is where our fishermen earn their living. It is how our islands are connected. It is how our trade flows. It is how energy and goods reach our people. As an archipelagic nation in the heart of the Indo-Pacific, we do not have the luxury of ignoring the maritime domain. Our geography demands that we pay attention. Our responsibility demands that we prepare. When we speak about a free and open Indo-Pacific, it can sometimes sound like a slogan. But in reality, it is very simple and practical. It means ship can sail without intimidation. It means aircraft can fly without harassment. It means disputes are settled peacefully. It means international law, not force, governs behavior. Today, the maritime environment is more complex than ever. In areas like the West Philippine Sea, we see increasing gray zone activities, maritime coercion, militarization of features, and advanced surveillance capabilities that can see almost everything that moves. Security at sea is no longer just about ships and sailors. It involves satellites, cyber networks, unmanned systems, data fusion, and alliances. That is why safeguarding the maritime domain is not something any nation can do alone. Let me share with you in a straightforward way the 4 areas where cooperation truly matters. First, strengthening defense partnership. Partnership matter. The Philippines has long-standing alliances and friendships, including our treaty alliance with the United States. We are also deepening engagement with partners like Japan and Australia and working closely with ASEAN. Why does this matter? Because when nations train together, talk regularly, and plan together, misunderstandings are reduced. When partnerships are strong, deterrence is credible. Strengthening defense partnership means more than signing agreements. It means more meaningful exercises, real intelligence sharing, coordinated maritime patrols, honest strategic dialogue. For the past 2 years, we have strengthened our maritime cooperative activities with the United States, Japan, and Australia. Other nations are also showing interest in joining us. Last month, we participated in the STOP exercise with US and California. Also, just a few days ago, Stratcom had a very good discussion with Japan Joint Operations Command, and this will be followed by a meeting with their commander. We are also preparing for the AFP's participation in Pitch Black Exercise 2026 in Australia. All of these activities are intended to further deepen and strengthen our defense partnership with our allies and friends. Second, you cannot defend what you cannot see. Maritime domain awareness sounds technical, but it is very simple at its core. It means understanding what is happening on the surface, below the surface, in the air, in cyberspace, and even in space. At Strategic Command, we are working to integrate radar systems, air and naval patrol data, satellite inputs, and cyber intelligence into one coherent operational picture. But here is the most important part. Awareness must be shared. If we see something but our neighbors do not, the picture is incomplete. Real security comes when we build a shared understanding with partners. Modern technology allows us to detect patterns, identify unusual behavior, and respond more quickly. But the technology alone is not enough. Trust and cooperation make it effective. Visibility creates accountability, and accountability strengthens stability. Together with US, Japan, and Australia, we are working towards this direction to build a real-time common operational picture. Japan, through ATLA and JASDAP, are supporting us in improving our air surveillance system and future air operations capability. In addition, we are sending our officers and enlisted personnel to Japan to undertake courses regarding air defense, weapons control, and electronic intelligence. Third, improving interoperability. Interoperability is a big word for a simple idea. Can we operate together smoothly when it matters most? Strategic Command was established to prepare for the Armed Forces of the Philippines for multi-domain operations. Today's challenges do not stay in one domain. Maritime security is linked to air defense, cyber resilience, space-based systems, and information operations. Improving interoperability means compatible communication systems, integrated air and maritime coordination, joint planning processes, shared operational procedures. Exercises are not just for show. They are rehearsals for uncertainty. They build confidence, remove friction, and ensure that in moments of tension, we act with clarity rather than confusion. This year's Balikatan exercise will be the biggest so far, and with the highest participation of friends and allies all over the globe. All with the objective of improving interoperability with the armed forces of like-minded nations. For the first time, Japan is sending a contingent to participate in this year's Balikatan, and this will further improve our interoperability with them. Fourth, expanding cooperation in response to evolving challenges. Security challenges today are not only traditional military threats. We also face illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, maritime smuggling, environmental degradation, natural disasters intensified by climate change. These issues affect all of us. Cooperation among navies, coast guards, and law enforcement agencies builds habits of trust. Joint humanitarian assistance and disaster response exercises demonstrate that our militaries are also forces for good. A free and open Indo-Pacific is not about containing anyone. It is about preserving a system where all countries, large or small, can operate without fear. It is about rules. It is about respect. It is about predictability. What is the role of the Strategic Command? Strategic Command exists to think ahead. We anticipate emerging threats. We integrate capabilities across domains. We synchronize planning. We provide options to national leadership. We prepare not for yesterday's war, but for tomorrow's uncertainty. For the Philippines, our position is steady and calm. We seek peace. We uphold international law. We strengthen partnerships. We modernize responsibly. Matatag tayo, may prinsipyo, may dangal para sa ating karagatan, karapatan at kinabukasan. In closing, let me end on a simple note. The sea connects us. It should not divide us. If we strengthen partnerships, enhance awareness, improve interoperability, and expand cooperation, we can safeguard the maritime domain together. As Commander of Strategic Command, I assure you we will continue to plan, prepare, and partner to ensure that our maritime domain remains secure, stable, and open for generations to come. Maraming salamat po. Mabuhay ang ating bansang Pilipinas. Best regards to everyone. And at this point, I give the floor to Major General Tad Rupino Candelario to answer all your hard questions. Thank you very much. Thank you, Stratbase, and thank you to Professor Dindo Manhit. God bless to everyone.
All right. A round of applause, please, for General Pedregosa for a very informative speech. And as he said, we will have General Candelario later during the panel discussion to answer some of your questions. All right. Our next speaker for this morning is a distinguished fellow of the Asia Society Policy Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Mr. Danny Russel. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Well, thank you all very much, and thanks particularly to Stratbase and to JIIA. I'm really happy to be back in the Philippines, and it's a thrill to see many of my old friends from both Manila and Tokyo. The Stratcom commander is a hard act to follow. He speaks so clearly and thoughtfully. I'm impressed, and I also don't have a beautiful PowerPoint to amuse you, I'm sorry. But this is a really meaningful topic to me because I served as President Obama's special assistant for Asia, and I worked directly with Prime Minister Abe and his government. And we centered our alliance on a rules-based maritime order in the East China Sea and the South China Sea, defending freedom of navigation, freedom of overflight, pushing for peaceful and law-based dispute resolution, and importantly, pushing back against coercion. Today, we're in a highly competitive environment, and maritime security isn't just undersea, it's not just maritime, it's not just ships, it's not just maritime law enforcement, it's economic security, it's cyber security. It now includes critical supply chains, secure energy routes, resilient undersea and digital infrastructure, the protection of offshore and undersea resources, defense industrial cooperation. We've heard a lot of insights on these areas from previous speakers. The maritime domain is a kind of circulatory system of the region. The ports, the undersea cables, the logistic hubs, the energy flows. These are major arteries, the lifeblood of Indo-Pacific security and, of course, Indo-Pacific, even global prosperity. So definitely the role of the United States remains indispensable for regional stability. But I'll be very direct. Many, if not most, allies and partners of the United States have become quite anxious about the Trump administration's posture, the aggressive use of tariffs as leverage, other pressure tactics to extract concessions, to get investment, the heavy America first messaging and so on. These have made it hard to be confident that the rhetorical commitment by the United States to a free and open Indo-Pacific is really credible anymore, is sustainable anymore, is going to be enforced. And that skepticism, I think, is sharpened by the president's insistence that security allies and trading partners have basically been freeloaders, have taken advantage of the United States, that they need to pay more. They need to do what America wants them to do. In Washington itself, where I no longer live, I've moved back to New York, we see a sharp disconnect between a very transactional president who's focused overwhelmingly on deal making with China, and national security officials, the Congress, and much of the defense establishment who still see the Western Pacific as a vital national interest, people who are committed to maintain deterrence, to maintain maritime access, and resist the coercive behaviors in the South China Sea, East China Sea, Taiwan Strait. First and foremost is the Indo-Pacific Command, and their mission remains focused on the Western Pacific, of course. But the Trump administration's national security strategy and national defense strategy send mixed messages. They echo some of the traditional language on the Indo-Pacific, on deterrence, freedom of the seas, and so on, but they leave really big gaps by omitting any reference to, say, North Korea, or only barely, glancingly addressing Taiwan and the South China Sea. So I do not need to remind anybody here that in just the past month, US military attention and US military assets have been pulled dramatically towards the Middle East, towards Latin American theaters, and that drains badly needed resources away from the Indo-PACOM, and it fuels doubts about Washington's prioritization and Washington's staying power in the region. So I would say that today the American commitment to free and open Indo-Pacific is uneven. It's less visible at the political level and in the priorities of the current administration. And the net effect of this is that partners are forced to hedge. If Washington looks unpredictable, unreliable, distracted, countries are going to reduce risk by keeping other options open. And that can mean developing independent capabilities. It can mean self-censoring to avoid Chinese retaliation. And it can leave them in a position where they have to deal with China on a primarily bilateral basis, which puts them at, frankly, a disadvantage with such a large country. So the hedging has huge consequences, including for the United States. I've learned over a career as an American official, our strength is greatest when we are closely aligned with our partners to deal with challenges in the Indo-Pacific and around the world. I believe that the upcoming meeting in Washington with Japanese Prime Minister Takaichi and the upcoming meeting in Beijing with President Xi Jinping offer a kind of stress test of America's commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. In Washington, the president has an opportunity to showcase alliance unity, to show shared objectives, to show that Washington is fully committed to Japan's security. And in Beijing, the president has an opportunity to push back directly and clearly against Beijing's coercive campaign to target Japan, to target the Philippines, to target Taiwan. I'm not making a prediction, but the sooner the US restores a disciplined focus on FOIP, on free and open Indo-Pacific policies, the stronger our collective resistance to coercion is going to be, and the safer the Indo-Pacific region will become. So I'll stop there and look forward to the panel discussion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Danny Russell. And our next speaker is Professor Ryosei Kokubun, former president of the National Defense Academy of Japan. Let's give him another round of applause, please.
Thank you very much. I'm so proud of being here. And my name is Ryosei Kokubun. And after serving, working as a university professor at Takio University for 30 years, then I served as the president of the National Defense Academy of Japan for 9 years, starting in 2012. Well, I am a political scientist, mostly focusing on Chinese politics and foreign relations. Japan had many cadet schools before the World War II, but they were all abolished after the World War II. Only one new cadet school was established to train officers for the self-defense forces, JIIA, in the democratic era. That is this school. This is a graduation ceremony. I look quite young. But anyway, during my 10 years as president, I made official visit to military academies worldwide. In 2016, I officially visited the Philippine Military Academy, PMA, in Baguio City. The welcome ceremony they held for me, then it's unforgettable. They dedicated half a day of the school's schedule to my welcome ceremony with every faculty member and the students welcoming me. Slide 3. Next slide, please. At that time, I was honored to plant a tree in the center of the academic grounds. It was grown like this. Next slide. Next slide. Yes. 10 years. I've never been grown, but I'm aged, but my kids in Philippines is like this. I'm so proud of this. The exchanges between the Philippine Military Academy and the National Defense Academy began in 1992. To date, the NDA has already welcomed 35 Filipino graduates and current students. Security exchanges between the young people of Japan and the Filipinos have a long history and have steadily yielded result. We must continue to expand such an exchanges and deepen human connections. Now let me turn to my main topic. I'd like to briefly report on the three topics. First is China's the current domestic situation. The second is US-China relations, and third is Japan-China relations. Okay. The first, China's domestic politics. This is my specialty. Now, recently, the Xi Jinping has been purging close associates within the party and the government, primarily military personnel, as you may know. The two interpretations exist for this case. One suggests that Xi Jinping is purging, potentially threatening associates to consolidate his power. Now he is an extraordinarily powerful leader. This is one explanation. The other said that the factional struggles have emerged within the leadership over the issues like economic policies, US policies, and the succession issues. His power is not powerful than before. I believe the latter interpretation is rather correct. Well, of course, he has power, but particularly he's focusing on the police and propaganda. The Xi Jinping alone is most obsessed with the Taiwan unification. Having worked briefly in the military sector and spent many years working in the Fujian province, he seems to mistakenly believe he alone understands the military and the Taiwan very well. The Party Central Military Commission members who started in 2022 numbers 7, including Xi Jinping, but now only 2 remain with no replacement. I tell you, that is one of the best friends. Number 4 of the Communist Party. Used to be, not anymore. I invited him to Japan for 5 times. He was a visiting scholar at Takio University too. But anyway. So, subsequently, the differences of opinion likely emerged within the military regarding US-China relations and the use of forces to unify Taiwan. Zhang Youjia, who was the second in command to Xi Jinping on the commission, was recently purged, having served in devastating the Sino-Vietnamese War in his youth. Zhang Youjia is believed to have opposed to use of force to unify Taiwan, recognizing military inferiority and advocating for the conciliation with United States. Regarding Xi Jinping's successor, it is said that that summer, Hu Zhenhua, that guy, exceptionally capable and enlightened figure, backed by the Hu Jintao and the late Li Keqiang, was nearly confirmed. However, these scenarios suddenly disappeared afterwards. The weakest point of Chinese politics is the lack of rulers choosing political successors. If you look back the history of succession politics in China, well, serious power struggles occur at every time. To conclude, I think that Xi Jinping's, that's his existence, is I recommend him, he must retire soon. But anyway, he's the same age as mine. The second, the US-China relations. The President Trump is scheduled to make an official visit to China starting late March. Unexpected variables have emerged, the conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. This situation will likely persist for some time. China imports oil from Iran, I think almost the entire, so probably 13 to 14%. I think Trump may go to China specifically to request China's probably mediation role with Iran. Japan's former Prime Minister Abe once played this mediating role. In 2019, at the President Trump's request, Prime Minister Abe visited Iran, met its leadership, and contributed to calming the nuclear issues. Unfortunately, Abe is no longer with us. So, unfortunately, Japan's relationship with Iran is weaker than before. This leaves China probably in a position well suited to act as a mediator now. Later this year, Chinese President Xi Jinping is scheduled to visit the United States. Therefore, this year could potentially be one of the US-China rapprochement in the region. Japan might not be overly pleased about the US-China rapprochement. However, I believe it could have a positive aspect too. At the very least, regional security could stabilize temporarily. And the biggest theme in US-China relations, a Taiwan contingency, seems unlikely to occur in the next few years. However, this may only last for a few years. And the situation could eventually become more serious after the Trump administration. Therefore, we cannot stop deterrence. China will never give up on unifying Taiwan and strengthening the military buildup. The third, the Sino-Japanese relations. On October 7th, last year, Prime Minister Takaichi mentioned the possibility of Japan intervening in a Taiwan contingency within the context of a survival threatening situation, Sonritsu Kikijitai, stipulated under the right of collective defense. The Japanese government's usual position is that the first condition is the US intervention and the request to Japan, and that the Japanese government will make a decision on how to respond after comprehensively assessing the situation. Prime Minister Takaichi herself acknowledged she had spoken too much, but did not retract her remarks. China started criticizing Takaichi government as militarist. I say China must learn from the Japanese lessons in the past. Now China is becoming militarist. Now China's intention, I believe, was twofold. One, first, to isolate Japan. The fourth, retraction of the statements. The second, to check the US reaction and drive a wedge between Japan and the US. The President Trump's response to Takaichi's remarks was rather ambiguous. However, Japanese public opinion actually grew more supportive of Takaichi, with approval now exceeding 70%. In other words, China's hardline stance actually increased support for Takaichi. Frankly, this makes a dialogue between Japan and China seem difficult for the foreseeable future. Honestly, I wish the United States would better understand Japan's position and offer more support. But everything ultimately depends on the President Trump's calculation. Next slide. Earlier this year, on January 16th, the New York Times reported that the 2,000 Chinese maritime militia vessels had assembled in the East China Sea. That this training, visual after the Takaichi's remarks, saw scattered fishing boats suddenly gather and align themselves toward Japan. The action wasn't pressure on Taiwan. It was actually close to the Japan's Senkaku Islands and Okinawa. There might be a possibility that China may become more offensive to the Senkaku issues. From this, it seems clear that the US military presence in this region remains, of course, crucial. Of course, the dialogue between Japan and China is also essential to prevent crisis. Even Japan-China relations were strained over historical issues. Nevertheless, President Hu Jintao initiated the dialogue with the Prime Minister Abe and established a strategic and mutually beneficial relationship in 2006. We must never forget the dialogue in the most necessary during the difficult times. At the same time, cooperation and coordination between free and open countries is indispensable under such an unstable international order. In that sense, I'm sure that the security cooperation between Japan and the Philippines is an extremely important element, I think, for the stability in the Indo-Pacific region. I conclude my conclusion. The last slide. Yes, selfless service to God and country, honor and excellence. PMA's core values. That's important. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Professor Kokubun. Our final speaker for this morning's panel is the former Vice Commander of the Philippine Navy and a non-resident fellow of the Stratbase Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, let us all welcome Rear Admiral Romel Judong. Let's give him a round of applause, please.
Baka ma-steep neck ako. Thank you, Joyce. Two caveats before I start. Number one, I'm just substituting for Dr. Chester Cabalsa. So like Thaddeus answering the hard questions for Stratcom, refer the hard questions to Dr. Chester. Second, I'm not in government. Everything is my personal opinion. I have no idea what they're doing inside government. Next slide, please. So let's lay the predicate first. China's maritime strategy requires three axes of advance. And we look, by the way, this is standard lecture. No? I think half of the room already saw this before. And we look at Chinese maritime strategy in terms of three axes of advance and how it affects both the Philippines and Japan. This describes China's naval operational design as well as how it will support the Chinese Communist Party's political and economic objectives. For the Philippines, it sits astride two of the axes of advance, the middle one and the southern one, the southern part. Japan is affected by the northern axis of advance as China intends to advance towards the Arctic Ocean. By the way, I also use this slide to explain why Trump is fixated on Panama Canal and Venezuela. And this actually explains why he's in Iran right now. Okay. And the north one is why he's fixated in Greenland. Next slide, please. Now, the North, East, and South China Seas form a single maritime theater of operations. You cannot separate one from the other. There are many coastal archipelagic states surrounding these islands, but we only have one adversary, and that's China. And China looks at it as one single theater of operations. Unfortunately, we operate independent of each other, and we are operating in stovepipes. The Basi Channel is the likely decisive point for any naval conflict in the future, if any, involving Taiwan, which affects the Philippines. And the South China Sea, unfortunately, is not militarily defensible, okay, in case of conflict from a Philippine standpoint. In terms of using US valuation or the concept of value of the object, concept I got from the US Naval War College, there's nothing to die for in the South China Sea, okay, not the fish. So Philippine maritime defense posture needs to focus on developing the 7 slocks that it has as kill zones. Next slide, please. So this is where we are currently. So we're looking at different situations that all of them can become flashpoints for any conflict at any given time. Note that I'm not talking only of maritime concerns, but rather things that are happening inland due to Chinese United Front work activities, which is not part of my topic. Next slide, please. Now, we cannot talk about defense industry if we do not understand what it is going to be used for. So I've tried to separate it in terms of peacetime tasks, and the next slide will be on the wartime tasks. So just on the peacetime tasks, I've listed some areas where defense industry or private sector can help in terms of capacity building our maritime security forces. So I'll just take an example. For example, if we want the Coast Guard and the Bureau of Fisheries to have sustained maritime presence in our exclusive economic zone, they need more ships. Okay? They don't need sophisticated ships. They just need more ships, okay, to be able to protect our fisher folks and all our economic activities in the West Philippine Sea. So the solution there would be, how do you develop now the domestic shipbuilding capability and ship repair capability through capital infusion and technology transfer? Second, I'll skip some of. Number 3, we need comprehensive maritime domain awareness. Okay. That means, unfortunately, not all commanders are intelligence officers. So you need data that is idiot-friendly so that normal commanders can appreciate them. Okay. So for normal commanders, you need to crunch that data in a way that they can make decisions faster. So the fusion of information, like for the naval intelligence, our sources of information come from ships, aircraft, coastal radar, and human resource. But you need to fuse them all together. It takes time to actually make an assessment. So you need an artificial intelligence overlay to crunch the data faster and make it accessible to the commander faster. Number 4, on space-based ISR. 10 years ago, the Navy, at least during my time, already made an assessment that we need to shift away from shore-based radar to space-based ISR. Why? We cannot fight the curvature of the Earth. Even if the mass of the radar is tall, it still is subject to physics. Okay? So we want to look at space-based ISR. So we sent actually 2 officers to train on nano-satellite technology, and they actually went to Japan and participated in the assembly and launch of the Maya satellite. Okay? So we're looking at microsat constellation. When you say constellation of microsats, you're going to deploy at least 6 to 8 microsats in space because they are not geosynchronous. Okay? So the Earth revolves, but the satellites are fixed. So that at any given time, you have at least 2 or 3 microsats overhead giving you ISR coverage. Okay? And Dr. Sese, one of the pioneers of space design, space studies, actually identified Mati Davao Oriental, that's in Mindanao, as the ideal launch pad for if we want to invest in space, commercial space activities. We need undersea sensors. We can monitor the surface, but we do not know how many submarines are lurking around Luzon Strait. Okay? So maybe this is an area, a gap that we need to fix. We need to monitor the Chinese Coast Guard and militia vessels. We need a non-kinetic response to Chinese gray zone tactics. I asked the Navy if we can look for an icebreaker that is no longer being used. Okay. Because icebreakers are good for dealing with militia vessels that want to ram it. Okay. Okay, next slide. So for wartime tasks, these are my wish list. Okay, we need to disrupt China's escalation dominance over the Philippines and develop strategic deterrence. Okay, so the U.S. deployed the Typhoon missile system. I think that's a good solution, but it's not ours. No country that is following the missile technology control regime will sell it to us. So we need to develop it on our own. Okay, anything that is over 300 kilometers will have to be developed here, because no country will sell it. Second, we need an asymmetric response to the PLA Navy Surface Force. That's why we went to buying the BrahMos anti-ship missile system. And also we need to look at undersea or surface drones. When we were discussing this, when I developed the Naval Capability Plan of 2016, we have a description for frigates. Frigates F, floating targets. Okay. And what happened in Sri Lanka, I think 2 days ago, reinforces that. So what is valid in 2016 is still valid in 2026. Frigates are floating targets. We need an asymmetric response to the CCG and militia vessels because BrahMos is very expensive. You do not use it to shoot a militia vessel that is very low cost. Okay. So may ROI din ang ano eh. Shooting missiles has a return on investment construct as well. We need to defend our 7 SLOCs and configure them as kill zones for asymmetric warfare. That means you need to focus on cheaper solutions, which is fast attack craft, drones, naval mines, short-range anti-ship missile system, and a local MDA capability. As I said earlier, the West Philippine Sea is not militarily defensible. The hard line for defense would be the 7 archipelagic strait. And of course, the submarine. They don't want to approve the submarine because it's very expensive. But what we discussed 10 years ago is still valid now. We were not buying the submarine just so it's nice to look at. It was supposed to sink Chinese commercial vessels. Because the economic center of gravity of China is maritime trade. 95% of China's trade goes by sea, and most of them pass through the Philippine archipelago. That is deterrence. Next. So I will answer some of the questions laid out that was sent to me by the staff. Okay, how can regional countries integrate defense-cooperate into the FOIP? We need to build on already what is existing, the Philippine-US Japan trilateral commitments that we made during the time of President Biden can already be we don't need to reinvent the wheel. And if you look at those commitments, half of them is about economic resiliency measures. We need to expand coverage to other like-minded states, aside from the 3, and maybe look at Australia, Canada, South Korea, etc. What are the opportunities for defense industrial partnerships? We can have policy discussions with the Department of Defense to review the AP modernization law and SRDP law and see how it can be enabled to protect to involve the private sector to be globally competitive in the defense industry product. It cannot be, the market cannot be armed forces alone, the Coast Guard alone, or the national police alone. It has to be globally competitive. Otherwise, it will not make money. If it doesn't make money, it's not an industry. It's a pet project. Or worse, it's a white elephant. Conduct a market studies to assess how to integrate defense industry supply chains between the Philippines, Japan, and other partners. Okay? To expand collaboration in terms of industrial zone, shipyard, sovereign drone capability. And lastly, consider investing in STEM education in the Philippines. So science, technology, engineering, math education in the Philippines, high school system, and maybe in the UP College of Engineering. Because we need the humanware more as well as the hardware. Next slide. How can the PPP contribute? Adopt the RICA app. I posted this in the earlier discussion, I think with the Italian embassy. The RICA app is the combating piracy mechanism. We can use that similar mechanism because it involves both private sector and government to address security of submarine cables. Because if you assess the posture in terms of submarine cable, most of the capabilities actually is not in government, it's in private sector. So how can cooperation framework be designed to ensure inclusivity, allow for capacity building in terms of tech transfer, human resource training, or joint research and development? Leveraging our economies of scale, establishing resilient supply chains, example, chips. When we made our study on sovereign drone capability for the Philippines, the gap is chips. We can produce the body here, we can produce anything, but the chips, Philippines doesn't have it. We need to harmonize regulatory protocols, export controls, acquisition, reducing barriers to new entrants. Okay? Business industry interoperability standards in terms of how to do business and how maybe simple as measurements of products and funding mechanisms. Next. What policy measures are needed to build a sustainable regional defense industry? We need to look at principle of complementarity and integration, a whole-of-nation approach between government, private sector, academia, civil society. I think General Padilla mentioned it earlier. Regional cooperation platforms, expand the trilateral arrangement to business industry. So the trilateral commitments we have was a product of discussion between national security advisors, defense ministers, and foreign ministers. Why not have the trade ministers part of the conversation as well? Or the economic development planners part of the conversation as well? Last slide na to. Teka, balik. Okay, what are the potential projects? Invest in capacity building programs. We look at shipbuilding and repair hubs and maritime domain awareness infrastructure, supply chain arrangements in complementary industries, and regional funding and risk-sharing mechanism to support maybe research and development. In the way I understand it, in the Armed Forces Defense construct, R&D is not part of the, not funded. So it's a thank you activity, okay? We need to invest more in research and development, otherwise we're gonna end up with products that doesn't work. So I think that's my last slide. Thank you, good morning.
All right, thank you very much, Admiral Ong. So at this point, we will now proceed to our panel discussion. May I invite back on stage Professor Kokubun, Mr. Russel, General Candelario, and also Admiral Ong. And moderating this session is His Excellency Takio Yamada, Executive Director of the Japan Institute of International Affairs Center for Global Outreach, and he is also a former ambassador of Japan to Vietnam. Let's all give them a round of applause, please.
So already good afternoon, everybody. And as time is pressing, and so I'd like to make it candid and concise. But first I'd like to thank all the panelists who gave us, shared with us, very rich and comprehensive perspectives of the fundamental issues we are now facing. And I'd like to start with asking two top and leading expert on the US policy, foreign policy, and China, Mr. Russel and Mr. Kokubun, about the geopolitical questions of the region, because the security of maritime domain in the region is so much related to the power politics and geopolitics of the region now going on. And Ambassador Russell gave us very clear perspectives of what's going on in the United States and the foreign policy community. And I actually listened to it very carefully, and I enjoyed it. But still, I have many questions about the trajectory of the present US administration. So I make it very short. Dr. Russell, can we count on the commitment, security commitment of the United States under the current administration? Number two, what will be the expected outcome of President Trump's visit to China later this month and early next month, particularly on the issue of Taiwan? Please give your perspective on these fundamental questions.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Yamada. On the first question, I would say that the reassuring part of the equation is that, first of all, the national security infrastructure within the United States, in the government, in the Congress, public, remains deeply committed to the American role of providing security and maintaining long-term stability, and would be quite resistant to compromises reached by President Trump in Beijing that ceded control or hegemony of Asia to China. The president would be swimming against a very strong tide in the United States. That said, of course, he has a record of ignoring the conventional wisdom or the traditional views of the professionals. But there's a second factor, which is that as much as President Trump may focus on commercial advantage and gain, one of the things that is critically important to him is the appearance of strength. And I don't see President Trump acceding to an agreement or allowing the visit to unfold in a way that makes him look weak. In fact, there is, if anything, the opposite problem, which is I think that the recent spate of US military attacks, the extraordinary operation that captured Venezuelan President Maduro, and now the dramatic assault on Iran, may well convince President Trump that he is going to Beijing from a position of great strength and has new leverage over Xi Jinping by virtue of intimidation. It defer to Professor Kokubun, but it may be that the opposite is true, and that the net effect of the recent attacks is simply to convince or reinforce Xi Jinping's conviction that he can't trust the United States. He can't allow any vulnerabilities or dependencies on the US, and that he has to dramatically strengthen China's own defenses and capabilities. And this is layered on top of a long-standing sort of Leninist conviction that the American system is in decline, that it's highly polarized, and so on. Now, the last thing I would say is that all of the indications are that President Trump goes to Beijing very focused on limited commercial deals, sales of commodities, transactions with Boeing planes and so on, that he and Xi Jinping, for their own reasons, are interested in sustaining or extending the so-called truce on tariffs, truce on critical mineral export bans. There's a fair amount of talk about some limited investment regime that would allow Chinese money to flow into the United States under certain conditions. But these are issues that don't go to the heart, the structural problems that the US and China face, and neglecting those problems is dangerous in the extreme. And secondly, the emphasis on stabilizing things, stabilizing the relationship while better than the alternative, is deeply flawed because stabilizing isn't the same as stability. It doesn't create equilibrium, it postpones the inevitable, and it is driven in part by the desire on the part of both the United States and China to use this breathing space to strengthen our respective capabilities so that we can resume the conflict in a more dominant position.
Well, thank you very much. And things have been made very clear by your statement, but still, stability and stabilizing are different. And so we have to be very curious about the delicate implications that visit may have for all of us. And next, can I ask Professor Kokubun? First, I'm so much appreciative of your very fundamental and very deep insights about what's going on in China. And in particular, among all the very important messages, I heard very carefully that you said that after the visit by President Trump, Taiwan situation, you are not expecting the continuance in the near future. That's what I understood. And that's actually a very important aspect because some people say that the next year, 27, will be very critical for the Taiwan issue. So could you share with us your understanding and perspective, why you believe that contingency over Taiwan is getting less likely in terms of domestic politics of China and their foreign policy?
Thank you. Two reasons. First, if you look at the history of U.S.-China relations in the past, particularly after the post-war period, but the main issue was, of course, the Taiwan issue. Started since 1950s, and I think this time the rapprochement is going to be happening. That means, of course, this rapprochement, well, of course, mutual distrust, that's never changed. But they have to associate and negotiate it together. Why? Just like the Cold War period, U.S.-Soviet relationship, distrust to each other. But they started negotiation because they have distrust. That this time, I think probably that issue was nuclear issues based on. But this time, probably economy. And the interdependence each other, they cannot break each other. So that means the US-China with distrust, but negotiation and dialogue. So I think if the Taiwan contingency happens, China invaded Taiwan, of course, US got angry, and the US loses their faces. So that means that probably it's difficult for starting the invention by Chinese military, in a foreseeable 1 or 2 years. But probably another Trump administration in the next 3 years, probably being quiet. But in the meantime, China's military build-up will probably be more. And then the second reason is the domestic Chinese situation. I think after the economy is like this. And then, as I said to you in my presentation, now the China's military personnel, military commission, only two out of 7. How you manage the military? And most of the people, the purged, mostly from the military sectors. How you manage, right? So I think it's almost the lack of leadership, particularly on the military sectors. I don't think it's possible. But as I told you, we have to prepare for the next time. Of course, China will, this time the 7% increase, right? That's a tremendous increase, 5 more times than Japanese defense spending. That's really something. So we have to prepare, and we need, of course, we have to consider about the deterrence against China. That's true, never changed. But of course, one thing, the Taiwan issue, the Xi Jinping's main topic, right? Only he is thinking, probably, very seriously. So that means, Xi Jinping, the leadership, will continue forever? Well, I have a strong doubt. Already 13 years passed. I think, still, of course, a very complicated situation is going on in the Chinese politics. But Xi Jinping's leadership is not forever. That's my conclusion.
Well, thank you very much for your very profound insights about Chinese politics. And your explanation gave us some time, but not a relief. And so we have to advance the cooperation among like-minded countries very steadily.
Yeah.
And my next question goes to Major General Candelano. And Major General Pedregosa gave us a very eloquent and clear views about the strategic policy of the Philippines Armed Forces. And he mentioned 4 pillars of cooperation. Yeah. And I was particularly interested in his reference to maritime domain awareness, because that actually directly related to the theme of this symposium. And particularly, as Admiral Takei mentioned, that maybe intelligence cooperation would be getting more and more important and imminent challenge for us. And as we provided the radar system to you by OSA, and so could you give us your prospect and your ideas how we should advance and proceed the cooperation in maritime domain awareness?
Okay, very simply put, mechanisms, enabling mechanisms are agreements. Example, we've got the General Status of Information Sharing Agreements with the US. And as mentioned by the J5, I think that was Tuesday, meeting between Japan, Australia, Philippines, and the US was done, and we started talking about how we can, mechanisms to enable that. So first is ensure that the policy mechanisms to enable information sharing happens. The next one is we will have to make sure the right information is shared. We agree, as mentioned by our earlier speakers, convergence on what relevant information should be shared. So next one is convergence. The third one, most important, the networks that enable sharing at the level we want, the resolution we want, should be established. So I think the talks conducted by the J5 on maritime domain awareness, the air picture, surface picture, subsurface picture. Even the electronic warfare situation across the South China Sea has to be shared. And we're starting out. The important questions were asked this Tuesday, and I think we're moving forward. I had the opportunity to talk to our J3 counterpart from the JJOC, Japan Joint Operations Command. And from the start of a simple handshake and spending 1 hour together and then talking about how we can operate better. It means planning together better, sharing information, and then working together to achieve our both common end states. That's going to be the most important thing to do. So for maritime domain awareness, it's going to be information sharing. And we're already talking about the mechanisms to get that done. Succeeding to that will be the technical solutions to get information together so that we will have unified action. So thanks a lot, sir, for the question. I hope I clarified the matter.
Thank you very much for your very clear and logical explanation. Just I'd like to draw your attention to the priority initiative by Prime Minister Takaichi. That is comprehensive reform of the intelligence system of Japan. So this gives us a good opportunity for the cooperation between Japan and the Philippines and Japan and like-minded partners of the region. So my last question goes to Major General Om. And thank you very much for your very comprehensive explanation of the potential areas of the cooperation for defense industry. And well, actually, that's also a priority area of Prime Minister Takaichi's initiative. We are trying to promote and enhance the capacity of cooperation by our defense industry. And so this is a very right moment and timely moment for advancing the cooperation between Japan and the Philippines. And you give us a very comprehensive views that we can't do everything by one shot. And so could you give us some of your priorities? What you are trying to do with Japan particularly, or maybe US and other partners in the near future? What is your immediate interest?
I think the immediate interest with respect to West Philippines, South China's key, is how to contest Chinese maritime presence in our waters. And as I said earlier, the Coast Guard needs more ships. But getting ships from Japan is good, but it's not sustainable with the requirement. So we have, the Philippines has a shipbuilding industry, but it just needs to level up in terms of modernization, capacity building, and human resource development. So if the Philippines can build its own ships, and I think the Bureau of Fisheries source its ships locally, then it can be competitive. We don't have to rely with other countries. We have shipyards in Subic that was bought by Cerberus, US firm, formerly from South Korea. I think it can expand its operations more. It can do shipbuilding also. We have Tsunesi here in Cebu, but it's more for commercial. So the capacity is there, human resource there. So we just need to tweak it a bit so that it can actually address the maritime requirements of our agencies here.
Well, thank you very much. And we are actually having a very intensive discussion on shipbuilding with the United States at the moment. And well, there's actually a lot of discussion going on within Japan on this industry. And so that may give a chance for furthering the cooperation with the Philippines too. That's my impression. Thank you very much. And there are so many questions, even I myself have, but now already time has passed 30 minutes. And so may I just ask you to just, pose your questions over lunch. Lunch is ready. And so I'd like to stand between you and lunch. So if I'm permitted, may I just conclude this exciting discussion? And we wish to continue this discussion over the lunch. So please give a big applause to all the excellent, distinguished panelists of today's session. Thank you very much indeed.
Please stay on stage. All right. Thank you very much to our panel. And please stay on stage for a quick photo opportunity. All right. Okay. All right. Once again, let's give a round of applause for our panel. Professor Kokubun, Mr. Russell, General Candelario, Admiral Ong, and of course, Ambassador Yamada for that very comprehensive discussion, sir. Thank you very much.